Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something incredibly human and, honestly, deeply moving: childhood loss. We're going to follow a 7-year-old's entirely non-linear journey through the grief of losing her mother, because, this isn't some straight, predictable path. It's really an exploration of how a very young mind navigates a totally overwhelming emotional landscape.
So you got to ask yourself, how exactly does a 7-year-old process a world that almost overnight suddenly feels way too big? It's a heavy question, right? As adults, we kind of expect grief to follow the rules: denial, anger, acceptance, the whole shebang. But for a child whose emotional capacity is still, well, just blooming, the reality is completely different. They don't process loss on some structured agenda. Instead, they process it in these wild flashes of emotion, imagination, and play.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Vibrancy of early memories.
Just look at the sheer joy here, running completely free through a field of white daisies, holding a pinwheel, the sun just catching her hair. This incredibly bright, vibrant memory absolutely establishes the joyful, expansive status quo of her early childhood. Before everything changed, her world was basically this giant space for exploration, light, and carefree movement. All of it anchored completely by the safety of her mother's presence.
But when loss happens, that massive, expansive world kind of shrinks right down. It zeroes in on the intimate, quiet reminders left behind. Look at these tiny, pink, knitted baby booties, just resting softly on a stack of clothes. Tangible objects exactly like these become profound anchors. They tie her directly back to the intimate memory of the mom she lost. Honestly, it's often in these incredibly quiet, physical, everyday artifacts that a child feels the absolute crushing weight of absence the most.
Which brings us to Section 2, Lost in the Forest.
And this brilliantly illustrates the moment her emotional landscape just becomes completely overwhelming. We see her small figure peering out from behind these massive, dark tree trunks, with only a little white rabbit for company. This visual metaphor completely nails that feeling of sudden isolation. When faced with such profound sorrow, she's literally dwarfed by her environment, hiding behind the trees in a reality that has suddenly become, frankly, deeply intimidating.
So the crucial point here is a psychological concept called grief overload. Basically, it's a state where a child's emotional capacity is just completely swamped by loss. Surprisingly, actually, it makes perfect sense when you think about it. A 7-year-old's brain simply doesn't have the neurological hardware yet to process that much sustained emotional pain. And that leads directly to these withdrawal or hiding behaviors. They naturally seek shelter from an emotional burden that is, quite frankly, adult-sized.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, Echoes and Distant Longings. Now, this surreal, almost dreamlike scene of a distant train cutting through the snow, this powerfully captures something called magical thinking. Magical thinking is this psychological quirk where a child hopes, entirely against logic and reality, for the impossible, like her mother somehow returning. She's standing there in the snow, watching that train, maybe hoping it's going to bring her mom back. It's poignant, it's beautiful, and yeah, it's a deeply heartbreaking coping mechanism.
Notice the powerful juxtaposition going on here. That intense, waking desire for connection, represented by the distant train, bleeds really softly into her quiet reflection as she rests. Her eyes are gently closed, her face is perfectly calm. It really shows how the mind of a grieving child processes this intense longing, moving from that active, magical hoping in the waking world right into the subtle, quiet processing of her dreams.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, Grief as Puddle Jumping.
Here's a real game changer. Unlike adults who might, wade in a deep river of grief for months on end, children are literally puddle jumpers. One minute she might be in the absolute depths of sorrow, and the very next, boom! She abruptly jumps right out of that emotional puddle to grab a jump rope, slap on a bright smile, and just play. This sudden burst of energy doesn't mean she forgot her mom. It is a deeply necessary emotional break.
And we see this continuous jumping out of the puddle in these bursts of normalcy. Whether she's swinging totally freely in a bright red dress suspended up in the air or crouching down to playfully collect items in the golden hay, these are healthy, absolutely essential breaks. These little explosions of playfulness contrast sharply with her deep sorrow for sure, but they're exactly what give her the resilience to process her grief in bite-sized, manageable pieces.
Guiding us into the final phase, we have Section 5, Discovering Quiet New Comforts.
Clutching a little teddy bear, her eyes closed in quiet reverence, she actually begins to find an ongoing sense of connection to her mother. Through these reflective, gentle moments of prayer, she's creating this safe internal space where she can speak to her mom, feel her presence, and just find some real solace without being totally overwhelmed by her physical absence.
Alongside that internal connection, we start to see the steady return of simple, everyday wonders. Look at her with those bright red headphones and a single pink balloon. Simple joys are finally being welcomed back into her life. Music becomes this new, comforting, emotional anchor for her. It's a profound sign of healing, really. She's allowing herself to feel light, to listen to some tunes, and to basically just be a kid again.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the entire journey just comes together. Looking out at that golden sunset with the wind catching her hair, she isn't leaving her mother behind. Not at all. Rather, she's achieving this beautiful integration of her loss into the life that still lies ahead of her. She's holding tightly onto those precious memories while bravely stepping forward into the light.
So, this leaves us with a final, absolutely crucial question to chew on. How can understanding this nonlinear journey help us better support the grieving children in our own lives? Grief isn't a straight line, folks, and it definitely isn't just an adult process shrunk down to kid size. It's puddle jumping. It's magical thinking. It's finding solace in a pink balloon or a quiet prayer. Recognizing this actually challenges us to build a more compassionate society. It lets us offer real patience instead of pressure, and true presence instead of trying to offer quick solutions. Think about the kids in your own world and ask yourself, how can you help them feel safe enough to jump in and out of their own puddles? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.